Sports and comedy fans rejoice. You're listening to the SNL Postgame Show. I'm thrilled you're here. I'm your host, James Hauser, here to take you through the game that was the first episode ever of Saturday Night Live. And what a night it was. We'll be recapping the episode, breaking down the film, and grading it sketch by sketch, compiling all the stats for the not ready for primetime players, handing out awards for plays of the game, and MVP, and ultimately letting you know whether or not SNL got a win this week. It's comedy turned into sports for your amusement. Now, being that this is our first episode, let me give you a little bit of insight into how we're going to grade each SNL episode. As we go through the live sketches, the pre-recorded sketches, and any special segments, the monologue and weekend update, each is going to get a plus or a minus grade, generally a plus or minus one, but in cases of incredibly great pieces or absolute bombs, you may see a plus or a minus two. The final numbers are then tallied at the end to determine whether or not it was a W or an L for Saturday Night Live that week. And we're starting with the very first episode from season 1 in 1976, so it's gonna be a long ride. The show is also meant to be consumed after watching the episode, so if you haven't had a chance to see it yet, I'd go back, watch episode 1. All of the episodes of SNL are available on Peacock, the streaming service for NBC, and that way you can play along, watch each episode, and then tune in to the post-game show after. Well, let's not waste any time and dive in. We're going to start with the live sketches first, which means first up is the cold open titled The Wolverines. Now, on its face, this sketch doesn't have much going on. It's just two guys sitting in a living room, and one is apparently giving the other an English lesson. What makes this sketch hilarious is 100% John Belushi's delivery, the voice he comes up with, which is kind of like what Andy Kaufman would end up doing later on Taxi, is absolutely hilarious. And this whole premise is carried simply on how he delivers the lines. And he has that famous line,
I would like to feed your fingertips
to
to the Wolverines.
to the Wolverines.
It really means nothing. It's total nonsense. But what's funny about it is obviously his delivery and the voice he uses, but just the utter cluelessness that John displays in this sketch is great. And that's why ultimately I think this is a +1 sketch. The ending isn't great. Really what this is in the first sketch ever in SNL, they prove one of the hardest things about sketch comedy, which is how to end a sketch. And ending a sketch well is almost impossible. And so when it's done really well, it sticks out. And in here, they obviously didn't have an ending. So Mike O'Donoghue's character just has a heart attack, and it's copied by John. Yeah, it's fantastic. So +1 on their first sketch. All right, the next sketch after that was a commercial, one of 4 commercials actually in this first episode of SNL, but most of those were pre-recorded. This was actually a live sketch called New Dad, where it's a product where if something happens to your dad, if your dad dies, if you sign up for the New Dad insurance policy, you have a new dad that comes over, and now that's your new dad. And the new dad that comes in was Chevy. Not a super funny sketch. I think this could have easily been a -1 on the grade, but what I thought saved it, and I credited Chevy with a save on this sketch, was just the way he sits down and starts to make out with the wife at the end. I thought his timing, everything was great. So ultimately, I gave this sketch a +1. What followed that was a courtroom sketch. Now this, almost the entire cast was in. You had George and Chevy, Garrett Morris, Jane Curtin was the witness on the stand, Dan Aykroyd, John Belushi, and Gilda Radner were all in the jury. And the premise of this sketch was that she didn't want to have to say what the guy said to her in the dark alley, right? Or she was accosted by this guy. And so what they do is they have her write it down and then they pass it around. So really this was just an opportunity for some great reaction takes from the cast as they pass the note around, with the audience not knowing what is on it, and everybody just gave some great solid takes as it worked its way all the way through. And so just on the ability of the cast in silence to react to this note just kind of shows their comedic chops, and I thought carried this to a win. So I gave this sketch a +1 also. So on the first 3 sketches, we're already up 3. Things are looking good this first episode of SNL. But after that, after the courtroom, the next live sketch was called Victims of Shark Attacks, which was a talk show setting for Jane Curtin to interview John Belushi, who was an apparent shark attack victim. I didn't love this sketch. I thought ultimately the premise was pretty dumb, given that the guy didn't even suffer from any shark attacks. He was hiding it, right? He had his arm folded under his jacket. His leg was folded up underneath him. Why is this guy in the show? Okay, he doesn't actually have missing limbs. None of it was funny. Jane, who I think is a solid performer, didn't have much to do, played it totally straight. And I just thought ultimately it was a pretty weak sketch. So this was a -1 for me. And the sketch after this, the live sketch after this, was the Muppets one. Now, I think the Muppets are going to be a regular thing through this first season. This is called The Land of Gorch, and this was one of the worst sketches I have ever watched, if you could even call it that, in my life. It just wasn't funny. Not a single funny thing was said in the entire sketch. They paraded these gross, ugly-looking Muppets around. I mean, the only cool thing about it was you could hear some of the voices that would later come on to voice some of the most iconic Muppets ever, playing some of these terrible characters. But overall, I'm amazed something that Jim Henson was involved with like this could be this awful. I mean, it really was terrible. Still only gave it a -1. Really considered giving this one a -2. But that was the second weak sketch in a row here on week 1. And really the show started to kind of drag a bit during the middle, and it looked like they might struggle to come out of it. But followed up after that was Bee Hospital. So essentially all of these dads were buzzing around the waiting room dressed up like giant bees, and they were actually making buzzing noises. Now, on the surface, this looks really stupid, but I think what they were going for here was low-hanging fruit as a joke, right? That the nurses would bring out these babies to the expectant fathers and say, oh, you got a drone, oh, you got a worker, oh, you got a queen, and they would react off of that, right? Which is kind of a stupid joke, but they did it in such a high concept way, which is the best way if you're going to go for the dumb joke to do it. And I thought that made it really great. But famously, I mean, from what I understand, Lauren was not a huge fan of this, and he himself thought this totally bombed, but I'm going to give it a plus grade here. All right, now there was only one more live sketch in that first episode, and it was what I called simulated robbery, which was essentially there's a couple, John Belushi and Gilda Radner, and Dan Aykroyd busts in and appears to rob them. But what he's really doing is he's there to sell them his home security program, and so this was a simulated robbery just to show them how much they needed his help.
Hi there! Please do not be alarmed. This is only a simulated assault and burglary. Repeat, this is a simulated assault and burglary. This could happen to you at any time. In fact, it just has.
Honey, call the police! Do something!
No, don't call the police. I am the police. I might be, anyway. Hi, Mr. and Mrs. Cromer. My name is Kenny Vorstrather. I'm president of Trojan Horse Home Security.
It wasn't a great sketch as it was written on the page, but I can't overstate this enough how much Dan goes for it in this sketch. He totally sold the crap out of this, and he should play a salesman character every chance he gets because he himself, he was incredible. I credited him with a save for this sketch because I think without him and his total 110% going for it, it would have been a loss, I think. But Garrett Morris comes in as his partner at the end. He's kind of more used as a prop, unfortunately. He's not given as much to do. But Dan, I think, brings this one across the plate and scores a run here with this sketch. All right, we're going to move on to the pre-recorded sketches now. And essentially what these are any sketch that was recorded previously to them going live, right? Simply just not sketches that were done live. And a lot of these are commercials, but they weren't all commercials. But we're going to start with the first one, which was Jamatol. Now, this had Chevy Chase and Mike O'Donoghue in it. I have to admit right off the bat, and maybe this is just my own stupidity at play here, but what the heck is the joke here in this sketch? Somebody please help me. I absolutely did not get it. I watched this 3 times. I kept rewinding the tape. I kept trying to figure it out. Chevy's talking about Mike like it's his wife. I don't get it. So I gave this one a -1. It did make me laugh, but again, I'm fully admitting it could just be that I'm a moron. Now, the next pre-recorded sketch after that was another commercial called Try Opening, which, I mean, it's a cute idea, right? It's essentially that you have arthritis, but the bottle is too hard to open for people with arthritis, and so the name of the product is Try Opening. It was cute, but, I mean, not very funny, so ultimately I gave that one a -1 as well. Now, Albert Brooks came on here with a short film called The Impossible Truth. This had a few segments. It was like a news organization that was investigating impossible stories, and there were a couple of absolute barn burners here in this episode. The first segment in The Impossible Truth was about a blind cabbie who's lost his sight, but he's still driving fares around New York City. And I don't know where they found this guy, but he was a total natural. And I mean, they capped the sketch in a great way by they had a lady get into the cab, and she says where she wants to go, and he goes, "Is there any cars in front of me?" And she's like, "Nope, you're good." And he just takes off driving. Absolutely hilarious. And then there's a segment where the age of consent in what they call the progressive state of Oregon has dropped its age of consent from 18 down to, I don't remember what it was, 5 or 6, but there's a guy in a lounge trying to hit on a 7-year-old girl who's there acting like an adult. Basically, she's eating her dinner, and he's showing her his business card, talking about how he's in advertising, and
Actually, I'm in advertising. Here, I'll show you. This is my company here.
I can't read yet.
and the guy's trying to shoo away the reporter that's trying to interview him. It was one of the few times in this episode where I laughed audibly out loud. I can't read yet just absolutely killed me. So this was definitely a +1 for The Impossible Truth. All right, the next one was another commercial called Academy of Better Careers. And in this sketch, Gilda Radner gets a phone call from a salesman who is selling her on an exciting career of answering telephones for all the commercials that people say, we have people standing by to answer telephones. So it's a commercial for people to answer phones in a commercial. And really, Gilda was the only one that I gave a plate appearance to in this sketch. I mean, the whole cast was featured, but essentially it was just shots of them picking up phones. And what I thought saved this entire sketch was I was teetering on giving this one a -, but Gilda does this incredible surprise reaction take when she puts the phone down and it re-rings that just made me bust out. And that's why I'm giving this one a +. So Gilda definitely gets a save here in this sketch, keeping it in the green and not in the red. Now, what followed after that was 2 more commercials that I thought were pretty bad. One was called Show Us Your Guns, which was a spoof of another commercial that was on at the time. And in this case, they're just driving around. They're saying, whenever you see the Saturday night truck come by, show us your guns. And everybody's pulling out their guns, and it just wasn't very funny. The other one was called Triple Track. Now, this had George Coe in it talking about a razor with 3 blades, which is just a straight up commercial. There wasn't anything funny about it whatsoever. I know at the time, I think the most there was 2 blades, and so this was supposed to be utterly ridiculous because he closes the commercial with the line, "Because you'll believe anything." But dude, we got razors now with 4 or 5 blades on them, so this just hasn't aged well. And so ultimately I gave this one a -1. But I even tried to put myself in the shoes, of the time, and I just feel like even then wouldn't have been all that funny. All right, so that's the pre-recorded and the live sketches. So what we're going to touch on now is the monologue and then any special segments that they had. And what's interesting about this episode is George Carlin was the host, and he didn't really do a traditional monologue. He did 4 different parts of a monologue spread out throughout the entire episode. George actually never appeared in a sketch. But listen, George Carlin doing stand-up is always a home run. He knocked it out of the park here in every segment almost that he was in, -1. And so ultimately I gave the monologue a +2 because it was such a huge part of the show. And there's few things I enjoy more than listening to some classic George Carlin stand-up. So an absolute win from George. Although I would have liked to have seen him in a couple of sketches. I think, they kept him in the role that he was good at. And in a way, I think from a coaching standpoint, that was really smart, not to try and do too much with George, but just kind of keep him in his wheelhouse there. And so that, I think, was an absolute win. So I gave them +2. Now, there was 2 other special segments. There was Valerie Bromfield, who came up and did a little bit of stand-up, played a couple characters. One was a coach, and another was a volleyball player, and she absolutely bombed. The audience was dead silent through the entire set. I felt so bad for her as I was watching this. I mean, I was starting to get uncomfortable and cringe, and she was going for it. And look, I guess going into this, she was a former comedy partner of Dan Aykroyd's. They came up together. That probably is how she got this spot in the first episode, but she did not do well. She didn't just not do well. She totally bombed. I gave her a -2 on this one. Now, the other special segment was Andy Kaufman doing a rendition of Mighty Mouse. Now, I'm assuming if you're listening to the post-game show, you've seen the sketch, but it's basically just Andy standing there listening to a recorded version of the song and waiting for one part, just one, for him to lip sync to, and it absolutely destroys me every single time I rewatch this. And the best part to me is when he bends down halfway through to get a glass of water because it's too much, right? He's got to wet his whistle in between Here I Come to Save the Day. Absolutely all-time classic, iconic bit, worth a +2, and that's what I gave him for this special segment. That leaves us with, finally, our Weekend Update. Now, Chevy Chase was the host of Weekend Update for this first episode and likely far beyond that. And I thought overall it was a kind of an uneven performance, right? They ultimately went for 8 jokes in the regular Weekend Update, not including the remote segments, which we'll get to. But your typical anchor desk jokes, you went for 8. I gave them a +4 and a -4. There were 4 good ones, 4 duds. I thought the best joke by far was at Gerald Ford's expense. And you can even extrapolate this to some of our current presidents, but they joked, or I should say Chevy joked, about how they were writing a new campaign slogan.
Mr. Ford was on the campaign trail announcing in Detroit that he has written his own campaign slogan. The slogan, if he's so dumb, how come he's president?
There was another great joke about Jimmy Hoffa. The union was going to build a new headquarters in Detroit, and the new union president spoke about former union president Jimmy Hoffa and how he'll always be a cornerstone of the organization. Obviously alluding to the fact that they were literally going to build this building on top of where they buried Jimmy Hoffa. But ultimately, those are a couple great jokes, but the rest of it was a little uneven, so this one got a 0. It's not a +1 or a -1, but ultimately a wash. What I did give a +1 to was the one remote segment where Chevy threw it to Lorraine Newman at the Blaine Hotel, who was covering a series of murders. One of the best jokes in the entire episode. Lorraine is talking about how there's been another deadly murder, and that camera just pans out, and the dead bodies are literally with their feet sticking out of the doorway of the hotel room. You could still see their pajamas and their socks, and she's just deadpan delivering this report about murder, and she absolutely killed it. Her only appearance in the entire episode, and she absolutely nails it here. So great job from Lorraine. All right, let's move on and tally up the stats and see how our players did before we get back and put everything together and see whether this was in fact a win for this episode. All right, so essentially you'll see how these stats work, but we're going to go cast by cast. Essentially how many plate appearances they had, what their hits were out of those plate appearances, how many doubles, triples, home runs. I'll give somebody a walk if they were in a sketch, but they weren't given much to do or nothing really happened with them, and it wasn't necessarily a fly out or a ground out or a strikeout, but it just kind of, it was fine. They get a walk. Obviously, there'll be strikeouts too for people that really, really swung and missed. And as I said before, we've awarded saves to those who appeared in a sketch and really saved it from being a minus. So we'll go through all those stats right now. And so we'll start with who had the most plate appearances. And so John Belushi and Chevy Chase were tied with 5 plate appearances in this episode. John went 4 for 5 out of his chances. That's an average of 800. And he had 1 double with no strikeouts or walks. And the double I gave him was for Wolverines. I thought, while not necessarily a home run, it was very funny. It was a great way to start the show. And I think that was definitely an extra base hit. Chevy Chase also had 5 plate appearances. He did have a couple walks, so of his non-walk at bats, put him at 2 for 3, which essentially, because he had 1 strikeout for Jamatol, I thought that was just a total swing and a miss. But 2 hits out of his other ones, and I gave him a save for New Dad, as I had mentioned earlier. So Chevy ends the first game batting over 600, which is still really great. Now, the next 2 people that had 4 plate appearances was Dan Aykroyd and Gilda Radner. Dan had a great game. He did have a couple walks, but I had him going 2 for 2, so batting 1,000 with a double for simulated robbery. I also gave him a save for that same sketch. I got a double and a save for the same one. Just his salesman character is fantastic. I thought he definitely deserved an extra base hit for that one. And he didn't really have any sketches where I thought he made an out in. So some of them were walks, as I said, but ultimately I think he was 2 for 2. Gilda likewise, she had 4 plate appearances. I gave her 1 walk. She was 3 for 3 in her other appearances. Didn't have, any extra base hits or home runs or anything like that, but it just was really solid. Didn't have one where she really missed, and did give her a save for the Academy of Better Careers. So great start to the season for Gilda, coming out of the gates, batting 1,000 with 3 hits. Coming up with 3 plate appearances here, we got Jane Curtin. Jane just didn't have much to do. I thought she was very underutilized. Had her 2 walks and then 0 for 1 in her other plate appearance. That being the victims of shark attacks. You got to give her something to do. She's a talented performer, but just really underutilized here. And I'll say the same for Garrett Morris. Garrett Morris also had 3 plate appearances. Went 1 for 2 in those appearances, so batting 500. But just again, really underutilized. He was basically a prop in simulated robbery. Mike O'Donohue, 3 plate appearances for him, just generally mostly used as a straight man. He went 1 for 2 with he had a strikeout again for Jamatol. That was just bad. And then a walk. There was a lot of times where he just kind of was present. Again, not doing much. George Coe also had 3 plate appearances. Super vanilla, not very funny. He went 1 for 2 with his triple track, essentially being his strikeout. I gave him a K for that. He did get a hit for his appearance as the judge in the courtroom. I thought he did great, was believable, and kind of carried that through. And so I'll give him a hit for that one. Lorraine Newman, 1 plate appearance in Weekend Update. She got a hit, 1 for 1. She was like that clutch pinch hitter. The episode had been lagging in the middle, and they called Lorraine off the bench to pinch it, and man, she got on base. Just, again, fantastic performance. Her reporter character and the voice she uses is great. Hope to see more of that in the future, and hopefully they can use her some more. And so the cast overall, stat-wise, was a little bit top-heavy. Basically, it was John Belushi, Chevy Chase, Dan Aykroyd, and Gilda Radner getting all the opportunities and most of the hits. So hopefully there'll be some more opportunities for Jane, Garrett, and Lorraine especially going forward here. The host, like I said, George Carlin had 4 appearances. Gave him a 3 for 4, bat 750. He never appeared in a sketch, but he was a solid contributor. I think without George, this episode is a lot worse. So I think ultimately he came in as the host and really contributed a lot. All right, sports and comedy fans, it's time to get to the awards for this episode before we tally it all up. And so for our first award, we give our top 3 plays of the game. And so coming in at number 3 is Lorraine Newman with the reporter and the bodies still being there on the ground. I thought, again, fantastic performance, and that was definitely one of the plays of the game.
Chevy, I'm standing outside a room on the 15th floor of the Blaine Hotel, where number 38 in a series of grisly and bizarre murders has occurred just over an hour ago. The motive again, murder, as it has been in the previous 37 slashings.
And the number 2 play of the game goes to John Belushi. His incredible double bagger on Feed My Fingertips to the Wolverines gets him the second best play of the game. Just an all-around incredible performance. And finally, our number 1 play of the game, I'm going to give it to who's not even a regular cast member, but Andy Kaufman for Mighty Mouse is going to get the number 1 play of the game. This was the best play, and he didn't get statistics tracked like a regular cast member, but if he did, I would have gave him a home run for this one. The only guy to hit it out of the park tonight. So great job to Andy. That being said, the MVP for the night is going to go to John Belushi. Just overall solid performance from John. I mean, he went 4 for 5 at the plate, got a double, kind of put the team on his back, and just overall contributed probably more than any of the other regular cast members to the success of this episode. So John gets his first MVP here today. The Unsung Hero Award. This is an award we're going to give to a cast member who was given very little to do, maybe didn't appear that many times, but did a lot with what they were given, and you might not be surprised. The Unsung Hero Award is going to Lorraine Newman, again, for her one opportunity during Weekend Update. She came in like a pinch hitter and got a hit, and that's going to get her the Unsung Hero Award for episode 1. And now we're going to move on to Best Sketch and Worst Sketch. Best overall sketch, we're going to go with the cold open, the Wolverines. And I think while there was a lot of good sketches, there wasn't one great sketch. This one, I think, is going to stand the test of time just for John's performance here. So we're going to go ahead and give Wolverines the best sketch of the night. And then worst sketch is going to go to the land of Gorch. I might name the worst sketch award after the Muppets, which is hard for me to say because I love the Muppets. I love the Muppet Show. But this was awful. So worst sketch definitely goes to the land of Gorch. All right, sports and comedy fans, it's that time. Did they win? Well, after tallying up all the grades for the sketches, for the players, we ended up with a +4 on this episode, which is absolutely a win. So SNL starts off their first season 1-0. Great performances across the bat by its cast. Great job by the host, George Carlin. So ultimately, they come out of here with a win in their first at bat. And let me tell you guys, for their first time ever going live, this was a really impressive performance. Let's see if they can keep it together and ultimately put a win streak together. And I'm expecting a lot from this cast. All right, now before we wrap up, I want to hear some of your thoughts. So we're going to go now to a caller to hear some of your thoughts about the game and how y'all think it went. So go ahead, caller. What's your name and where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Joey from Berwyn, and I thought I was just wanting to call about the show. I'm really impressed. I wasn't sure what to expect, with these new guys, and it's the first time ever going live, and I mean even their name is like they're not ready for prime time, right? But I gotta say I think the kids can play. I really was impressed. I think, John obviously was a I mean, that guy can hit. But they got some other people there that I think could do a real good job too. I'm excited to see what happens. I think it's a strong team, but I don't know. I don't know maybe about this Jane girl. I mean, I don't know if it's too early in the season to start talking about a trade. I'd love to hear your thoughts, but ultimately they gotta figure out something else to do there. I don't know. I'll hang up and listen.
Yeah, thanks for calling, Joey. I appreciate your thoughts there. I do think it's a little too early in the season to start talking about trading Jane. I think she's a really good player. I think in this case the coaches just didn't give her much to do, and definitely didn't put her in a position to win. So I would wait and see how things play out with her. But I agree. I think these kids can absolutely play. I think John's going to lead the way for them this season, especially him and Dan and Gilda. And I think we're going to see big things from all of them. So I appreciate your calling in and your thoughts there. And to everybody else, I hope you have a great night. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Saturday Night Live and our breakdown here. So go on and celebrate a win in the first week. We're starting off 1-0. You can follow us on Twitter at SNL Postgame. And if you hurry, you could be the first follower, because at the time I recorded this, we have exactly 0 because we just started. Or if you'd like to reach out to me directly, you can email the show at snlpostgame@gmail.com. Why don't you send me an email and explain Jamatol to me? Please, spell out that joke. I don't understand. And we'll meet you back here after episode 2 next week. Thank you for listening, and have a wonderful evening.